Welcome back to Talmudic Legal Logic. And in this lecturette, I'll introduce you to two types of legal analogies used in the Talmud: treating like cases alike, known as gezerah shava, and argument a fortiori, mikal v'chomer. Let's go. The basic setup for the analogies is this. Assume that rule X applies to situation A. Basically, whenever situation A happens, the rule is X. The question is, what happens if situation B happens? And let's assume that the rule in situation B is not spelled out in any of the sources. How do we figure out what's the rule in situation B? Well, it might be that the rule in situation B is just like the rule in situation A. Or it might be that the rule in situation B is rule Y. This raises the question, why would anyone think that the same rule, rule X, should apply both to situation A and to situation B? Well, let's see how this works. If situation A is resolved by rule X or governed by rule X, and there is some similarity or some equivalency between situation A and situation B, then we might say that rule X can apply also to situation B. The kicker is that we have to figure out or find some relevant equivalence between situation A and situation B that would justify applying the same logic to both. This is what is known as gezerah shava, or literally equal fate, a rule that you might also have heard as treating like cases alike or treating similarly situated cases alike. If, however, somebody wants to make the argument that rule X does not apply to situation B, they have to explain how situation B differs from situation A. There is a term for this in Aramaic. It's called sha'ani hatam, which means it's different there. There is some relevant difference between situation B and situation B that makes situation A that makes rule X a bad fit. Let's take a look at an example. So, the question is, can you bring offerings on a holiday that coincides with a Shabbat? We need to back up and I need to explain why this is even a problem. So, among the many prohibitions to perform labors on Shabbat is a prohibition to carry objects from the private domain to the public domain. There are entire chunks of Talmudic rulemaking that pertain to how do you decide what's the private domain, what's the public domain, which territories apply to each of them, what objects, what happens. But the basic idea is you can't pick up a thing and move it from one domain to the other while Shabbat is in place. You might want to ask if that's a good way to use the day of rest or if that just makes the day of rest more stressful. But that's a question for a different day. The problem that our people face is what happens if on the same day that is Shabbat, there's also a holiday. And the holiday requires bringing an offering to the temple. So bringing the offering would require taking it from your home and carrying it to the temple. So carrying it from the private domain to the public domain. And the situation that concerns the sages in this particular sugya is an obligation to bring 2 loaves of bread to the temple on Shavuot. Assuming that Shavuot happens on a Saturday, we're going to have a problem. But it turns out that there is also an offering that people are required to bring during the Omer. The Omer is the count of days between Passover and Shavuot, and that also has some rules about the kind of offerings that people have to bring to the temple. So, if we're dealing with an Omer offering that falls on Shabbat, there is a rule that allows you to carry the offering from your house to the temple. Okay, so what's the rule if you have to carry the 2 loaves in Shavuot? Are the 2 loaves similar to the Omer offering or different from the Omer offering? Rabbi Eliezer finds an equivalency between the two offerings because they both use the same text. In both cases, the terminology uses the root hey bet aleph, have, lehavi, to bring. It uses the same word with regard to the Omer offering and with regard to the 2 loaves offering, implying that there is some intent to treat both of these issues in the same way. It's important to point out that our sugya, which is in Bavli Shabbat 31a, Rabbi Chia Barabba cites Rabbi Yochanan, who says that Rabbi Eliezer didn't mean to say that every single action that facilitates the performance of a mitzvah, of a righteous act, is going to override Shabbat. This principle is only going to apply to some mitzvot, to some obligations. It's not a fixed principle with regard to preparations for all mitzvot. Rather, each case has to be considered on its own merits, and therefore you have to cite some proof that this principle actually applies to a specific mitzvah. But in this case, he does have proof like that, because the same language is used in the biblical description of the Omer offering and in this biblical description of the two loaves offering. So, in this case, the textual similarity implies that the two types of offering are to be treated the same way, i.e., to override Shabbat. So, if you will, if the Omer offering can override Shabbat, and the Omer offering is equivalent to the two loaves offering, that means that the two loaves offering is also going to override Shabbat. There is another type of analogy that I want to go over, and this one is called argument a fortiori, mikal v'chomer. For this logic to apply, there isn't an equivalence between situation A and situation B. Rather, if rule X applies to situation A, the argument is that there is something about situation B that makes it an even better fit than situation A for the application of rule X. So if you will, the situation is this. Situation A incurs rule X, but it turns out that rule X is an even better fit for situation B than it is for situation A. And because of that, rule X will also apply to situation B, meaning if situation A incurs rule X, for sure situation B will also incur rule X. Let's take a look at an example. Assume that there's a legal dispute over a loan between dude and bro. Dude says to bro, pay me back the 100 zuz that I lent you. Bro says, I don't have any money of yours. This dispute appears in Bavli Bava Metzia 3a. But the story doesn't end there, because as it turns out, in order to triumph in court, according to the Bible, you have to have two witnesses. And it turns out that there are two eyewitnesses, and both of them say that they attest that bro does have 50 zuz that belong to dude. But remember, dude didn't want 50 zuz. Dude claims that bro owes him 100 zuz, and Bo claims that he owes dude nothing. Okay? So the witness's version is somewhere in between dude's version and bro's version. And the rule, says the Talmud, is that bro has to pay dude 50 zuz and swear an oath that he doesn't have any other money of dude's. So in other words, he's only responsible to the limit where the witnesses says that he owes, but he doesn't owe him the full 100. And the question is, why is that the rule? Where is this rule coming from? Let's find out. It turns out that there is a similar case that has an established rule. The similar case is a little bit simpler. Dude says to bro, pay me back the 100 zuz that I lent you. Bro says, hey, hold on, you only lent me 50 zuz. So in other words, bro admits that he owes 50 zuz, but he does not admit that he owes the full 100. And this case does have an established disposition. The disposition is that bro pays dude 50 zuz and swears an oath that he has no more of dude's money. Let's take a look at the two cases and compares them. The case up on top is the case in which we're trying to figure out what the disposition is. Dude claims bro owes him 100. Bro claims he owes 0. Witnesses claim that bro owes 50. But in the case that we know what the disposition is, dude claims that he's owed 100 and bro claims he only owes 50. We basically took bro at his word that he only owes 50. Okay, so now the question for you is this. Who is more believable regarding bro's debt? Bro or the witnesses? Give it a thought for a second. That's right, the witnesses, because the witnesses are objective. It's nothing to them if bro owes 0 or 50. They're just testifying about what they saw, right? They don't have 50 zoos at stake, right? They don't have a zoos at this race. So they're more believable than bro. And then if we took bro at his own word, certainly there's a good reason to take the witnesses at their word. So bro gets to return the 50 zoos and swear an oath regarding the rest. In both cases, Gezerah Shava and Mikal V'chomer, some affinity has to happen between situations A and situation B that leads to the application of the same rule to both situations. In Gezerah Shava, we're looking for a perfect analogy between the two situations. In Mikal V'chomer, we're looking for the better suitability of situation B that implies the application of the rule that we know applies to situation A.